Welcome to Logitique. I'm your host, Dr. Raymond Chang. The European Chamber of Commerce in China has recently released a major report that addresses the problems arising from increased overcapacity in China's industrial economy. The report, titled Overcapacity in China, an Impediment to the Party's Reform Agenda, provides a detailed examination of the causes and consequences of overcapacity in 8 key industries and analyzes the developments that have taken place since the European Chamber of Commerce published its original report on this topic since 2009. The report explains how the central government efforts to address excessive production capacity have been ineffectual due to regional protectionism, weak regulatory enforcement, low resources pricing, misdirected investment, inadequate protection of intellectual property rights, and an emphasis on market share. The report also provided some 30 recommendations that should be taken to address this deep-rooted problem. So, these are all China's problems. Wait a minute, did you still remember just this April, a month ago, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen visited China, and she was talking about basically the same thing. Now, what has happened? Are they all correct? Is it all China's problem? This week, we'll have a look. Now, I was talking about the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's China visit back in April last month. Now, that was her second trip to China, when she raised American concerns about Chinese overproduction, warned against support for Russia, and unexpectedly caused a stir on Chinese social media over her travel style and chopstick-wielding skills. The visit, her second to China in 9 months as Treasury Chief, is aimed at addressing escalating trade disputes between the world's largest economies as the two sides try to stabilize relations following a summit between the U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping last November. Despite the overall positive tone of Chinese state media coverage, Yellen had a tough message for Beijing. She said, China's surging exports of state-subsidized electrical vehicles, EVs, solar panels and batteries are threatening American jobs and businesses and must be reined in. At a news conference, Yellen said she expressed concerns to senior Chinese officials that there are features of Chinese economy that have growing negative spillovers on the U.S. and the world. Now, she said, I am particularly worried about how China's enduring microeconomic imbalances, namely its weak household consumption and business overinvestment, aggravated by large-scale government support in specific industrial sectors, will lead to significant risk to workers and businesses in the United States and the rest of the world. Now, that's what she said. And here are the 4 takeaways from the trip. Number 1, so she said overcapacity is a problem. Number 2, please don't support Russia. Number 3, it's important to keep talking. Yes, Yellen used chopsticks quite well. Now, it's broadcasted all over the news in China. Chinese TV reporters were talking about this all over the news, saying, as a U.S. official, Yellen needs to know more about China than just its food. Only by understanding China better can she correct the U.S. worldview and its views of China and China-U.S. relations. So Yellen is really trying to speak her mind by showing you her chopstick skills. But wait, is China just overproducing? Why then would we overproduce if no one is buying? Now, look at China consumers' prices. China consumer prices fall sharply. If you look around, consumer prices in China have fallen significantly, dropping at the sharpest rate in more than 14 years. Producer prices also rose in January this year. So the Chinese economy has been dealing with deflationary pressures since early 2023. The consumer price index, the CPI, fell 0.8% in January compared to a year earlier, following a 0.3% decrease in December, according to the Chinese National Bureau of Statistics data. This drop in CPI is China's steepest since September 2009, largely driven by a significant decline in food price, according to reports. That's number 1. When we have falling prices and you want to maintain that income, you have to produce a bit more. That's not overproducing. And number 2, look at U.S. trade deficit. It falls significantly in 2023. The United States trade deficit shrank by nearly 19% in 2023, despite widening slightly in December. What this represents is the sharpest contraction in more than 14 years, driven by falling imports and rising value of exports. Now, in particular, the U.S. shift from an oil importer to an oil exporter has helped shrink its current account deficit. So if you look at that, is it because of the trade deficit? Come on. The United States have shifted. They've changed. The inflation-adjusted value of petroleum exports jumped from 15.9% in December to a record high. Economists predict that the U.S. economy will continue to benefit from trade in 2024, although risks remain, including disruption in the Red Sea and Panama Canal. So the country's trade deficit declined 18.7% last year, the largest narrowing since 2009, reaching $773.4 billion. Now, trade added more than half a percentage point to the economic growth last year, according to data from the U.S. Department of Commerce. Now, look around the world economy. According to Halifax, one of the UK's biggest lenders, house prices rose at the fastest rate since mid-2022 in January. So service activity in Japan grew at its fastest pace in September of last year, driven by strong demand and a weaker yen. Yen is going down, and that means export. Japanese export is going to go up. So, and look at UK. The UK unemployment rate was much lower than originally thought, according to the updated figures from the country's Office for National Statistics. German exports fell more than had been expected in January, largely as a result of weak global demand. It comes as the country's industrial output continues to fall, with production falling in December 1.6% from November's levels. However, German inflation did ease in January, slowing to 3.1%, down from 3.8% in December year-on-year. What about Australia? Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Michelle Bullock has warned that there's still work to do for the country to reach the midpoint of its inflation target of 2 to 3%. She stressed that the bank has not ruled out a further rise in interest rates. What about France? Look at France. The French economy is forecast to grow, 0.1 to 0.2% in the first quarter of 2024. Now, the country's central bank has said already. Urban consumer price inflation in Egypt fell more than was expected in January, slowing from 33.7% in December to 29.8%. Now, inflation had hit a historic high of 38% in September. Okay, so what does all this mean? Nobody is doing well. Okay, so we're all trying to do what we could do. Japan is trying to do what they could do. Germany is trying to do what they could do. France is trying to do what they could do. UK is trying to do what they could do. And even China is trying to do what she could do. So if you look at that, Janet Yellen actually has a three-body problem with China. The U.S. Treasury Secretary blasted Beijing's industrial overcapacity, but it's just a tough message to carry off convincingly. Now, in one of Yellen's first speeches as U.S. Treasury Secretary in 2021, Yellen declared that credibility abroad begins with credibility at home. The words were meant as a rebuke to the mismanagement of the administration of former President Donald Trump, but they might have echoed in her head as she spent her 5-day visit in China lambasting Chinese officials for promoting industrial overcapacity that threatens the United States' own turbocharged, state-incentivized industrial revival. Now, Yellen, on her second visit to China since becoming secretary, told Chinese officials in meeting after meeting that the country's export-driven economic model is again creating imbalances that threaten the global economy, especially the one she represents. She took aim at an avalanche of Chinese-made products, from electric cars to solar panels, that are making it tough for rivals in the United States and Europe to rebuild their own clean energy manufacturing sectors. Wait a minute. Did you hear what she said? I mean, look at that. When you can't do better than China and you are now saying that China is doing too good, that's what overproduction means. And Yellen said this as well. When the global market is flooded by artificially cheap Chinese products, the viability of American and other foreign firms is put into question. Oh, wait. What does it mean to say cheap Chinese products? So how would you be able to make cheap but good quality products? Do you call that cheap? Now, it's not because of it's cheap. It's because you can't compete with the quality, and it's because you can't compete with the very low profit margin. Mind you, Yellen is an economist. So now maybe someone wanted her to say it, that way, but message was really a tough one from an economist, long seen as relatively dovish on China, and who is years past to welcome the lower prices brought by wholesale globalization. She knew it. She knew how the game was supposed to work out. But it was a sign, if another word needed in this election year, that Yellen and the rest of the Biden administration are determined not to allow another China shock to hollow out the U.S. manufacturing again and leave more fallow ground for the politics of resentment. Now look at what Biden is doing. A 3-time increase in import tax for Chinese EVs, and more to come on medical equipment like syringes and protective gear. did you not notice one thing? Now, a policy brief of the American College of Physicians said the researchers examined voting trends and they found the physicians had a 20-year average turnout of something like 57.4%, which is lower than the general population of voter turnout of 63.4% for the same time. Okay, that explains why the syringes and the protective gear. Why are these things supposed to be taxed heavier? Because now you wanted the votes from the physicians. Now you see, it's not about business, it's about election, the votes. And now Yellen again. She has also acknowledged, as much in the comments at the end of the trip, we have seen this story before. Over a decade ago, massive PRC government support led to below-cost Chinese steel that flooded the global market and decimated industries across the world and in the United States. I've made clear that President Joe Biden and I will not accept that reality again. Okay, that's what she said. So you see, why steel? Just the same rationale as the medical equipment, syringes and the protective gear, and the same rationale as the EVs, as the solar panels. So when you are producing them at a much lower price, at a much lower profit margin, simply because you can, you're happy with that, then Yellen is not going to be happy with that. So that also explains now steel again, right? So Yellen's trip seems to have resulted in an agreement to keep talking about questions of industrial overcapacity and Chinese trade practices, a pledge that Yellen can file next to the one from the Obama years when the White House took aim at harmful Chinese economic practices that sort of imperiled American workers and was assured by Beijing that things would soon be different. Now that you see the issue here, they said Beijing did it that way back then. But they were not talking about this anymore. What does that mean? Beijing improved. But what are they talking about it now? Your products are of too good quality and it's too cheap. And it's now making us difficult to compete. Can you stop that? Now, that is the real statement behind all this. And as was true a decade ago, Yellen is still focused on what she thought supposed to be genuine problems: solar panels, electric cars, and the batteries that go into them. Now, those are many of the very things that the Biden administration wants to make more at home through such huge initiative as the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which includes historic government incentives to spur domestic clean energy manufacturing. And Biden thought it was going to help, but it didn't. Why? Because they just couldn't. It's not that they can't, it's just that they won't. So when they won't and we can, what are you complaining about? Now, but China's clean energy manufacturing is on a totally different scale altogether. Take solar panels as an example. The United States can make about 11 gigawatts of panels per year. And thanks to President Joe Biden's administration's push, hopes to maybe triple that in years to come. But a single Chinese company, Jinko Solar, just broke ground on what will be a 50 gigawatt factory. The country as a whole can make more than 400 gigawatts of new panels a year, accounting for more than 80% of global production capacity for every manufacturing stage, according to the International Energy Agency. You see, this was such a difference, a massive difference, that the United States can't compete. Wait a minute, when you say you wanted a cleaner world, a cleaner environment, a better world, is it not supposed to be, if we can do this, just let us do it, and then you do something else that we can't do? Everybody has their own strengths. Why are we all competing about the same thing? Is it because this is the only thing that you can do? And as massive as the Chinese market is for those same solar panels, and it is the biggest market in the world, it isn't that big, okay? China actually makes twice as many solar panels as it can use at home. Why? Because we need to make it affordable. So when it becomes affordable, what happens is everybody can buy it. Now, so what you can do instead is to do something else. But what the Americans were talking about is that the results are predictable. The surplus is exported to the tune of more than 30 billion a year. Wait, are we not supposed to make things so affordable, so cheap, that everybody can actually afford? You see, the problem here is, why is everyone trying to do the same thing? And just as Germany as well, the same thing happens to them too. Wait a minute, are we not supposed to do our part and you do your part and everybody does his or hers part and then we cooperate? Is this not how the world's supposed to operate? If everybody's going to do the same product altogether, this is going to be a disaster. Now, try to imagine this. This is not logical. Now, The same thing, very similar dynamics apply in other clean energy sectors. For example, China's BYD became the world's largest seller of electric cars late last year. China has an even more commanding lead in the bits that make those cars go, accounting for more than half the global sales of the lithium-ion battery packs used for electric vehicles. So, are we not supposed to just stick to one? I mean, this is so strange. Why is there such a challenge? The challenge is because we have different systems. Well, under the capitalist system, you compete. So you want to make sure that you're the best, and you're going to compete and make sure you're the best. But under a socialist system, this is a totally different story. We're not trying to do it that way. What we're trying to do is we cooperate. So we do one thing well, you do something else well. Who else does better capital financing than the United States of America? Are we going to compete? No, come on, nobody is complaining. So the thing here is, the challenge for Yellen isn't that her message is right or wrong, but rather is a three-body problem. First, there's this cheap energy imperative, which Biden is not supposed to go after. And then second, Yellen's message to China's leaders is that the United States is itself turning seriously towards a form of industrial policy, which they're not supposed to go into. The Biden administration has thrown huge sums in the forms of tax breaks and loan guarantees to incentivize both supply and demand of all sorts of new clean energy products, with an explicit eye towards revitalizing U.S. manufacturing. So, what is the problem? Come on, can we not cooperate? Why is it that everybody has to compete like that? The system, of course, the system. And number three, the US push is totally different from China's current drive in one key way, though. Biden aims to build US clean manufacturing largely to provide for the domestic market and insulate the country from supply chain risks. So evident in everything from semiconductors to rare earths, and not to flood overseas market with what they call artificially cheap goods. Whereas China is doing just the opposite. We are trying to provide everyone on this planet with, well, quality and affordable goods. So when the system is so different, when the thinking is so different, when the rationale is so different, you can't make the two agree. That is the problem. So what the Americans see was that Chinese leadership doesn't seem to have a recipe for growth other than the bellows-pumped, export-driven model that it turned to during the first China shock, and then again after the COVID-19 pandemic slowdown, and then now again when the other possible destinations for excess Chinese savings are less attractive. You see, the whole idea, the whole rationale, the whole perspective is, I wouldn't use the word wrong, but different. So different that they would never understand. Why? This is such a difference between the way we see not just business, but it originates from our culture. And that's why, talking about how Janet Yellen had used her chopsticks well, the China Shenzhen International Cultural Industry Fairs is coming, and to be held in the southern China city of Shenzhen from May 23rd to May 27th. Now, if you're really interested in knowing more about Chinese culture and avoiding that cultural shock, avoiding that misunderstanding, check it out. So, until then, ciao.
Before you leave, please be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with your friends. See you in the next episode.